The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance as Hannah Rose flew down the dusty road on a stolen horse, her heart pounding like thunder in her chest, knowing that if the Blackwell Gang caught her, she'd be dead before sundown. The year was 1878, and the California wilderness stretched endlessly before her, a landscape both beautiful and terrifying to a woman running for her life. Hannah's breath came in ragged gasps as she urged the horse forward, the animal's hooves pounding against the hard, packed dirt. Her once fine dress was torn and dirty, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins. The saddlebags contained all she had left in the world: a few dollars, a change of clothes, and the damning court documents proving she had testified against the most dangerous gang in Tuolumne County. 3 days earlier, she had stood in a Sacramento courthouse, pointing her finger at Jasper Blackwell and his men, identifying them as the outlaws who had robbed the stagecoach she'd been traveling on and murdered the driver in cold blood. The judge had promised her protection, but when bullets shattered her hotel window that very night, Hannah knew the promises of lawmen weren't worth the air they were spoken on. Now she was running blindly, heading north along the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Her only plan was to keep moving until she found somewhere to hide, somewhere the Blackwell Gang wouldn't find her. As dusk fell, Hannah spotted a small creek flowing alongside the road. Her horse needed water, and so did she. Cautiously, she guided the animal off the main trail and down to the creek bed. After dismounting, she cupped her hands and drank deeply, the cool water easing her parched throat. "That's far enough, madam." The deep voice startled her so badly she stumbled backward, nearly falling into the creek. A tall man on horseback had appeared seemingly from nowhere, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. The dying light caught the gleam of a rifle barrel pointed in her direction. Hannah raised her hands slowly. "Please," she whispered, "I'm not looking for trouble." The man studied her for a long moment before lowering his rifle slightly. "You're riding awful hard for someone not in trouble," he said, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "That's a Holiday Ranch brand on that horse, and I don't recall selling him to any lady." Hannah's heart sank. Of all the horses she could have stolen, she'd chosen one that belonged to the very man who'd caught her. I can explain," she began, though she had no idea what explanation could possibly suffice. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, moving with the easy grace of someone completely at home in the saddle. As he stepped closer, Hannah could see his face more clearly, strong-jawed and weathered by sun and wind, with penetrating blue eyes that missed nothing. "Name's Ethan Xavier," he said, keeping a cautious distance. "This is my land you're trespassing on, and that's my horse you're stealing." "I'm sorry," Hannah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'll be on my way, just please don't turn me in." Ethan took in her disheveled appearance, noting the fear in her eyes and the way she kept glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Who's after you?" he asked bluntly. Hannah hesitated. Involving anyone else in her problems would put them in danger too. But she was exhausted, hungry, and running out of options. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. Ethan's expression hardened as he quickly assessed the situation. Without a word, he grabbed Hannah's arm and pulled her toward his own horse. "Get on," he commanded, boosting her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. With practiced ease, he caught the reins of her stolen mount. "Keep quiet and follow my lead." They rode hard through the gathering darkness, leaving the creek and the road behind. Ethan guided the horses along what appeared to be a deer trail, winding through thick underbrush and stands of oak trees. Hannah could feel the tension in his body as he listened for pursuers. After nearly an hour of riding, they crested a small rise, and Hannah saw the silhouette of a ranch house against the night sky. Lamplight glowed in the windows, and the outline of a large barn stood nearby. "This is the Rocking X," Ethan said quietly, "my ranch." He guided them toward the barn rather than the house, dismounting quickly and helping Hannah down. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her from exhaustion and fear. "Stay here," he instructed, leading both horses inside the barn. Hannah stood rooted to the spot, wondering if she should run while she had the chance. But where would she go? And how far would she get without a horse? Ethan emerged from the barn a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a rag. They've been fed and watered, he said, as if it were perfectly normal to be harboring a horse thief. Now it's your turn. You look about ready to drop. Hannah stared at him, confusion plain on her face. Why are you helping me? Ethan's expression was unreadable in the darkness. Let's get inside first, then you can tell me exactly what kind of trouble you've brought to my doorstep. The ranch house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and clean, worn rugs on the plank floors. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, and the warmth of the room made Hannah realize how cold and tired she truly was. Ethan busied himself at the stove, warming up what smelled like bean stew. He poured her a cup of coffee and set it on the table. Drink that, he said. Then start talking. Hannah wrapped her cold fingers around the hot cup, grateful for its warmth. My name is Hannah Rose, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I testified against the Blackwell Gang 3 days ago in Sacramento. They killed a stagecoach driver during a robbery outside Angel's Camp last month. I was a passenger. I saw everything. Ethan's expression darkened. Jasper Blackwell, he said, the name coming out like a curse. He's not a man who forgets a slight. The judge promised protection, Hannah continued, but they found me the very first night, shot up my hotel room. I barely escaped with my life. She took a shaky breath. I've been running ever since. I'm sorry about your horse. I was desperate. Ethan set a bowl of stew in front of her. Eat, he said, his tone softening slightly. We'll figure something out. Hannah looked up at him, searching his face. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I know Jasper Blackwell, he replied grimly, and I know what he does to witnesses. As Hannah ate, Ethan explained that his ranch was located near Knights Ferry, California, about 20 miles from the road she'd been traveling. It was remote enough that casual travelers rarely passed by, but close enough to town that he could get supplies when needed. How many men ride with Blackwell these days? He asked, sitting down across from her with his own bowl. At least 6 that I saw, Hannah replied. Maybe more. They all testified against me at the trial, claiming they were nowhere near Angel's Camp when the robbery happened. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. But the judge believed you. There was another witness, an old prospector who saw them riding away from the scene. He came forward after reading about the stagecoach robbery in the newspaper. Hannah's voice faltered. I don't know what happened to him. He was supposed to be under protection too. The implications hung in the air between them. If the Blackwell Gang had already found and silenced one witness, they wouldn't stop until they found Hannah too. You can stay here tonight, Ethan said finally. There's a spare room upstairs. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next. Hannah wanted to protest, to say she couldn't put him in danger, but exhaustion was overwhelming her. The warm food and the first sense of safety she'd felt in days were making it hard to keep her eyes open. Ethan showed her to a small bedroom at the top of the stairs. The quilt on the bed looked hand-stitched, and a pitcher of water sat on a washstand in the corner. Get some rest, he said, lingering in the doorway. No one will find you here tonight. As he turned to go, Hannah called after him, Mr. Xavier, thank you. He paused, looking back at her with those intense blue eyes. Just Ethan, he corrected. And don't thank me yet, Miss Rose. Morning might bring trouble we can't outrun. With that somber thought, he closed the door, leaving Hannah alone with her fears and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd found a safe harbor in the storm. Hannah awoke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the unfamiliar room, the soft bed beneath her. Then memory returned with brutal clarity, the trial, the gunshots, the desperate flight from Sacramento. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding, half expecting to see Jasper Blackwell's men bursting through the door. Instead, she heard the distant sounds of a working ranch coming to life, the low of cattle, the whinnying of horses, men's voices calling to each other. Ordinary sounds that somehow made her extraordinary circumstances seem all the more surreal. Hannah rose and went to the washstand, splashing cold water on her face. Her reflection in the small mirror was hardly recognizable, dark circles beneath her eyes, her normally neat hair a tangled mess. her face pale with exhaustion despite her night's sleep. She did her best to make herself presentable. Using a comb she found on the washstand and pinning her hair back with the few pins she still had, when she descended the stairs, she found Ethan in the kitchen, frying bacon on the cook stove. He glanced up as she entered, his expression guarded but not unfriendly. "Thought you might sleep the day away," he commented, gesturing toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself." Hannah poured herself a cup, grateful for the rich aroma that promised to clear the fog from her mind. "I haven't slept that well in days," she admitted. "Thank you for your hospitality." Ethan nodded, transferring bacon to a plate and cracking eggs into the hot grease. "Hospitality's one thing, harboring a witness against the Blackwell Gang is another matter entirely." His blunt words sent a chill through her. "I'll leave after breakfast," Hannah said quickly. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Ethan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "And go where, exactly?" He set the plate of food in front of her. "Eat while we talk. You'll need your strength." As they ate, Ethan outlined what he knew about the Blackwell Gang. Jasper Blackwell had started out as a small-time rustler before graduating to bank and stagecoach robberies. His reputation for ruthlessness was well earned. He left no witnesses and no loose ends. "The law's been after him for years," Ethan explained, "but he's smart, covers his tracks. Your testimony is the closest anyone's come to putting him away." "And now he wants me dead," Hannah said quietly. "Yes." Ethan didn't sugarcoat it. "And he won't stop looking until he finds you or hears you're dead." Hannah set down her fork, appetite gone. "Then I need to keep moving. Maybe head east, lose myself in a big city where no one knows me." "You wouldn't make it 50 miles, Ethan said flatly. "They'll have men watching every road, every stagecoach station, every train depot, and a woman traveling alone draws attention." "What choice do I have?" Hannah demanded, frustration giving her voice an edge. "I can't stay here and put you in danger." Ethan was silent for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Actually," he said slowly, "I think that's exactly what you should do." Hannah stared at him in disbelief. "Stay here, but they'll find me eventually." "Not if they believe you're already dead," Ethan countered. He explained his idea. He would spread word that he'd found a woman's body in the creek on his property, presumably drowned while trying to cross. He'd claimed to have buried her on his land, as was sometimes done with unknown travelers who died in remote areas. "With the right details mentioned in town, a woman matching your description, wearing clothes like yours, word will get back to Blackwell's men," Ethan reasoned. "They'll believe their quarry is dead and move on." Hannah considered the plan. It might work, but it also meant she would be completely dependent on this man she barely knew. "How long would I need to stay hidden?" "At least until the talk dies down," Ethan replied. "A few weeks, maybe a month." "And then what?" Hannah asked. "I can't just reappear from the dead without Blackwell hearing about it. By then, we can arrange safe passage somewhere far from here, maybe up to Oregon or Washington territory." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "But you'd need to be completely invisible while you're here. No going to town, no being seen by anyone who comes to the ranch." The prospect of being confined to the ranch for weeks was daunting, but Hannah recognized it was probably her best chance at survival. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked again, still unable to comprehend why this stranger would risk so much. A shadow passed over Ethan's features. "Let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see Jasper Blackwell pay for his crimes." Before Hannah could press for more details, a voice called from outside. "Boss." "Riders coming." Ethan was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Damn," he muttered. "Get upstairs and stay there. Don't make a sound until I come for you." Hannah didn't need to be told twice. She hurried up the stairs, heart hammering against her ribs. From the bedroom window, she could see 3 men approaching on horseback. Though they were still too distant to identify, the sight of them filled her with dread. She heard the front door open and close as Ethan went outside to meet the visitors. Unable to help herself, Hannah crept back to the top of the stairs, straining to hear. "Morning, Xavier," a rough voice called. "Beautiful day, ain't it?" "What brings you out this way, Dalton?" Ethan's voice was casual, but Hannah could detect the tension underlying his words. Just passing through, looking for someone as a matter of fact. There was the sound of boots on the porch steps. Woman, early 20s, auburn hair. Seen anyone fitting that description? Can't say that I have, Ethan replied evenly. What's she done? Nothing that concerns you, the man named Dalton said. But Mr. Blackwell is mighty anxious to find her. There'd be good money in it for anyone who helps. Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Blackwell's men were already here, less than a day after she'd arrived. How had they tracked her so quickly? I haven't seen any women out this way in weeks, Ethan said. Unless you count old Mrs. Winters who delivers eggs from town now and then. There was a long pause, and Hannah could imagine the men sizing Ethan up, trying to decide if he was telling the truth. Mind if we have a look around? Dalton asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. I mind quite a bit, Ethan replied, his voice hardening. This is private property and I've got work to do. Now, don't be unfriendly, Dalton said, his voice taking on a menacing edge. We're just doing a job, same as any man. Your job is hunting down innocent women for Jasper Blackwell, Ethan said bluntly. That's not same as any man in my book. The tension in the air was palpable even from Hannah's hiding place. She heard the creak of leather men shifting in their saddles. You're making a mistake, Xavier, Dalton warned. Nobody wants to be on Blackwell's bad side. And nobody wants to be shot for trespassing, Ethan countered. But that's what'll happen if you don't turn those horses around right now. Hannah held her breath, certain a gunfight was about to erupt. But after a tense silence, she heard Dalton laugh, an ugly, humorless sound. Always were a hard-headed son of a gun, he said. We'll be on our way, for now, but we'll be keeping an eye on this place. You do that, Ethan replied calmly, and I'll be keeping an eye on you. The sound of horses moving off told Hannah the immediate danger had passed. She sagged against the wall in relief, only to jolt upright again at the sound of boots on the stairs. Ethan appeared, his expression grim. They're gone, he said, but they'll be back. Dalton's been riding with Blackwell for years. He's not easily fooled. They found me so quickly, Hannah whispered, horrified. How? They're likely checking every ranch, every farm in the area, Ethan explained. But the fact they came here specifically, I don't like it. Someone might have seen us riding together yesterday. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm morning. What do we do now? We accelerate the plan, Ethan said decisively. I'll ride into Knight's Ferry today, spread the word about finding a woman's body. The sooner Blackwell's men believe you're dead, the safer we'll both be. While Ethan was in town, Hannah remained hidden in the house, jumping at every sound and peering anxiously out the windows. She felt like a prisoner, albeit one in comfortable surroundings. To keep her mind occupied, she took it upon herself to clean the kitchen and prepare a meal from the supplies she found in the pantry. The simple, domestic tasks helped calm her nerves. Late in the afternoon, she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Peering cautiously through the curtains, she was relieved to see it was Ethan returning. He looked tired but satisfied as he entered the kitchen. It's done, he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. Word's already spreading. I told the story to old Tom at the general store. He's the biggest gossip in Knight's Ferry. By nightfall, everyone in town will have heard about the poor unidentified woman I found drowned in my creek. And Blackwell's men? Hannah asked anxiously. 2 of them were in the saloon, Ethan confirmed. They didn't approach me, but I could tell they were listening when I was talking to the bartender about my grim discovery. Hope flickered in Hannah's chest for the first time in days. Do you think they believed it? They will when I give them a few more details to chew on, Ethan said, sitting down heavily at the table. The aroma of the stew Hannah had prepared seemed to catch his attention. You cooked, Hannah nodded, suddenly self-conscious. I thought, well, you're doing so much for me. It seemed the least I could do. A ghost of a smile crossed Ethan's face, the first Hannah had seen from him. It smells good, he said simply. As they ate, Ethan outlined what would happen next. He had mentioned finding a brooch on the drowned woman's body, one matching the description of a piece Hannah had been wearing when she testified in court. In a day or two, he would ride back into town and mention that he'd buried the unknown woman on his property, as was sometimes done with travelers who died in remote areas. "The next part is crucial," Ethan explained. "We need Blackwell himself to believe you're dead, not just his men. That might take a few days." "And in the meantime," Hannah asked, "in the meantime, you need to stay completely out of sight," Ethan said firmly. "No going outside during daylight, no approaching the windows. If anyone comes to the ranch, anyone at all, you hide in the root cellar under the kitchen floor." He showed her the trapdoor beneath a rug in the corner of the kitchen, leading down to a small, cool storage space dug into the earth beneath the house. It was meant for storing potatoes, apples, and preserves through the winter, but it would serve as an emergency hiding place if needed. "It's not comfortable," Ethan acknowledged, "but it's better than the alternative." Hannah shuddered, knowing exactly what the alternative would be if Blackwell's men found her. Over the next few days, Hannah settled into a strange routine of confinement. She slept during much of the day and moved about the house only after dark, with the curtains tightly drawn. Ethan had given her free rein of his small library, so she passed many hours reading books she found on his shelves, histories, adventure tales, and even a few dime novels that made her smile with their romanticized versions of frontier life. Ethan himself was something of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance, rarely speaking about himself or his past. He worked from dawn till dusk, coming in only for meals, which they now shared in a quiet companionship that was gradually becoming more comfortable. One evening, about a week after Hannah's arrival, Ethan returned from town with news. "It's working," he said as he hung up his hat. "Blackwell himself was in Knight's Ferry today, asking questions about the dead woman. I made sure to be at the mercantile when he came in." Hannah looked up from the book she was reading, her pulse quickening. "You spoke to him directly?" Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "He asked me about the woman I found. I told him she matched the description of someone he was looking for, right down to the clothes and that distinctive brooch." "Was he convinced?" Hannah asked anxiously. "I think so. He seemed satisfied." Ethan's expression darkened. "He even thanked me for saving him the trouble of dealing with her himself." Hannah felt sick at the thought of Jasper Blackwell discussing her death so callously. "So what happens now?" "Now we wait," Ethan said, sitting down across from her. "If Blackwell truly believes you're dead, he and his men should move on within a few days. Once they're gone, we can start planning your journey north." The prospect of leaving filled Hannah with an unexpected sense of loss. Despite the circumstances, she had found a strange peace in this isolated ranch house with its quiet, enigmatic owner. "I still don't understand why you're helping me," she said softly. "You've put yourself at considerable risk, and for what?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, staring into the fireplace. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tight with emotion. 5 years ago, my younger sister was traveling from San Francisco to visit me here. Her stagecoach was robbed outside of Sonora." His hands tightened into fists on the table. Jasper Blackwell was just starting to make a name for himself back then. He killed the driver and all the passengers. Every last one. Hannah's heart contracted with sympathy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "There was a witness," Ethan continued, his voice flat. "A young man who saw the whole thing from the hillside where he was hunting. He came forward, identified Blackwell and his men, but before the trial, he disappeared. His body was found in the Stanislaus River 3 days later." The parallels to Hannah's situation were chilling. "And Blackwell went free," she guessed. Ethan nodded grimly. "Without the witness, the case fell apart. Blackwell walked out of that courthouse a free man, smiling like he'd just won a hand of poker." Hannah reached across the table and placed her hand over his clenched fist. "I understand now," she said quietly. Ethan looked down at her hand on his, something shifting in his expression. "When I heard about a witness testifying against Blackwell in Sacramento, I knew history would repeat itself. I just didn't expect that witness to steal my horse." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, almost a smile, the moment between them stretched, filled with a new understanding. Hannah became acutely aware of her hand still resting on his and drew it back slowly. "Well," she said, attempting lightness, "if I hadn't stolen your horse, I might be dead by now." And I'd have missed out on having a house guest who actually knows how to cook, Ethan replied, the tension between them easing. That night, Hannah lay awake long after she'd gone to bed, thinking about Ethan's revelation. His hatred for Jasper Blackwell ran as deep as her fear of the man. In that shared enemy, they had found common ground and perhaps something more that Hannah wasn't ready to examine too closely. The next morning, Hannah was awoken by the sound of horses approaching, several of them from the noise. She froze in bed, listening intently, then scrambled to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. What she saw made her blood run cold. Jasper Blackwell himself, along with at least 5 of his men, was riding up to the ranch house. There was no sign of Ethan, who had mentioned going out early to check on a sick calf in the far pasture. Hannah didn't hesitate. She pulled on her dress, grabbed her boots, and hurried downstairs to the kitchen. Lifting the rug, she opened the trapdoor to the root cellar and climbed down, pulling the door closed above her just as she heard boots on the porch. The root cellar was cool and smelled of earth and stored vegetables. A small shaft of light came through a crack in the trapdoor, providing just enough illumination for Hannah to make out her surroundings. She crouched in the darkest corner, hardly daring to breathe. Above her, she heard the front door open. Had Ethan left it unlocked, or had they forced their way in? Search the house, came a commanding voice. Blackwell himself, she presumed. Top to bottom, heavy footsteps moved through the rooms above. Hannah could track their progress: the parlor, the study, then up the stairs to the bedrooms. She prayed they wouldn't notice the slightly rumpled bed in the room she occupied, or the few personal items she'd left there. Place is empty, boss, a man's voice reported after several minutes. No sign of anyone. What about Xavier? Blackwell asked. Where is he? Not in the barn or the corral, might be out on the range. Then we wait, Blackwell said decisively. I want another word with our helpful rancher. Hannah's heart sank. They were staying, which meant she could be trapped in this small, dark space for hours. And worse, Ethan would be riding into a trap when he returned. Time passed with excruciating slowness. Hannah's legs cramped from maintaining her crouched position, but she didn't dare move for fear of making a noise. The voices above came and went as Blackwell's men made themselves comfortable in Ethan's home, helping themselves to his coffee and whiskey from the sounds of it. She lost track of how long she'd been hiding when she heard a commotion above the door opening, multiple voices speaking at once, then a single voice cutting through the others. What the hell are you doing in my house, Blackwell? Ethan's voice was cold with fury, but Hannah detected an undercurrent of fear. He must have seen the horses and known who was waiting for him, yet he'd walked in anyway, rather than fleeing or hiding. Just paying a social call, Blackwell replied, his tone falsely cordial. You've been so helpful, I thought I'd thank you personally. You've thanked me, now get out, Ethan said flatly, a chair scraped across the floor. No need to be inhospitable, Xavier. I have a few more questions about that woman you found. Hannah strained to hear Ethan's response over the pounding of her heart. I already told you everything I know, Ethan said. She was dead when I found her. I buried her. End of story. See, that's what's bothering me, Blackwell said, his voice hardening. My men tracked that woman's horse to this very ranch, yet you claim you found her in the creek, already drowned. Strikes me as a mighty big coincidence. Hannah's blood ran cold. They had tracked the stolen horse, of course they had. The one flaw in their plan was now threatening to unravel everything. The horse was wandering loose when I found it, Ethan replied smoothly. A day before I found the woman, I assumed it had thrown its rider, which might explain how she ended up in the creek. Show me where you buried her, Blackwell demanded. There was a moment of tense silence. Why? Ethan asked finally. Call it curiosity, Blackwell replied, or call it making sure you're not lying to me. Hannah heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. She pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from crying out. This was her fault. Ethan was in danger because of her. You're threatening me on my own property? Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. I'm asking you to prove what you've been telling everyone in town, Blackwell said. If that woman is indeed buried where you say she is, you have nothing to worry about. Another long pause. Hannah could almost feel Ethan weighing his options. "Fine," he said at last. "It's up by the North Ridge, we'll have to ride there." "After you," Blackwell said, the smirk audible in his voice. The sound of boots moved across the floor, followed by the front door opening and closing. Hannah waited, hardly daring to hope they had all left. After several minutes of silence, she cautiously pushed open the trapdoor and peered out. The kitchen was empty. Through the window, she could see a group of riders, Ethan in front, followed closely by Blackwell and his men heading toward the northern edge of the property. Hannah's mind raced. There was no grave, no body. When they reached the spot, Blackwell would know Ethan had lied, and then, she couldn't bear to think what would happen. She had to do something. But what? She was one woman against 6 armed men. Even if she could get to Ethan's gun cabinet, which she'd seen in his study, what chance did she stand against experienced outlaws? Then an idea struck her. It was desperate and dangerous, but it might be their only hope. Hannah hurried to the study, finding the key to the gun cabinet exactly where Ethan had mentioned. It was kept in the drawer of his desk. She unlocked the cabinet and selected a rifle, checking that it was loaded as her father had taught her years ago. Next, she ran to the barn, grateful that all of Blackwell's men had gone with their leader. Inside, she found what she was looking for: coal oil lamps, rags, and matches. Working quickly, she soaked several rags in the oil, stuffing them into empty bottles she found among the barn supplies. Her hands trembled as she saddled one of the horses left in the stable, not Ethan's prized stallion, but a sturdy mare that looked fast. Leading the animal outside, she mounted awkwardly, the rifle and her makeshift firebombs making it difficult. The North Ridge was visible from the ranch house, a rocky outcropping about a half-mile away. Hannah could see the group of riders dismounted there now, Blackwell gesturing angrily as Ethan pointed at the ground. She urged the mare forward, staying within the cover of trees as much as possible as she circled around to approach the ridge from the east. The terrain sloped upward, giving her a view of the scene unfolding below. Ethan was on his knees now, a gun to his head as one of Blackwell's men held a shovel, apparently having found nothing after digging where Ethan had indicated. Hannah's heart lurched at the sight. She was out of time. Positioning herself on the ridge above them, Hannah took a deep breath, lit the rag on her first firebomb, and threw it as far as she could into the dry brush about 50 yards from the men. The bottle shattered, flames erupting instantly in the parched summer vegetation. Before anyone below could react, she lit and threw a second bomb in the opposite direction. Flames leapt up hungrily, catching in the brush and beginning to spread rapidly in the hot, dry conditions. The men below spotted the fires immediately, their attention diverted from Ethan. Hannah raised the rifle and fired into the air 3 times in rapid succession, the shots echoing across the ridge. "Raiders!" she shouted at the top of her lungs, her voice carrying on the wind. "The ranch is under attack." The diversion worked better than she could have hoped. Confused and alarmed by the fires and gunshots, Blackwell's men scrambled for their horses. Ethan, seizing the moment of distraction, drove his elbow into the gut of the man holding him and rolled away, coming up with the man's dropped gun. Chaos erupted below as Ethan fired at Blackwell's men, forcing them to take cover. The fires, fed by the dry vegetation, were spreading quickly, sending columns of black smoke into the sky. Hannah fired the rifle again, aiming well above the men's heads but close enough to send them ducking for cover. In the confusion, she saw Ethan break free, running for his horse. 2 of Blackwell's men pursued him, guns drawn. Without thinking, Hannah aimed the rifle at the ground near the pursuer's feet and fired. The bullet kicked up dirt and stones, startling the men enough that they hesitated. That momentary pause was all Ethan needed to reach his horse, swing into the saddle, and gallop away from the ridge. The fires were growing, beginning to join together into one larger blaze. Blackwell and his remaining men were retreating, more concerned with escaping the flames than continuing their pursuit of Ethan. Hannah turned her horse and raced back toward the ranch, taking a different route than she had come, hoping to intercept Ethan. She had nearly reached the barn when she saw him riding hard toward the house. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him, apparently unharmed. But her relief was short-lived as she realized the danger was far from over. The fires she had started were spreading rapidly, and Blackwell's men, once they escaped the immediate threat, would surely regroup and return. Ethan's expression as he approached was a mixture of astonishment and anger. "What in God's name were you thinking?" he demanded as they reached the barn together. "Saving your life," Hannah retorted, dismounting shakily. "They were going to kill you. And now they'll know you're alive," Ethan said grimly, swinging down from his horse. "That gunfire will bring every ranch hand within 5 miles. If Blackwell doesn't figure out it was you up there, someone else might recognize you." The reality of what she'd done hit Hannah with full force. In trying to save Ethan, she might have exposed herself and confirmed his lies to Blackwell in the process. "I couldn't just let them kill you," she said, her voice breaking. Ethan's expression softened slightly. "No, I suppose you couldn't." He glanced toward the ridge where smoke still billowed. "We need to deal with that fire before it gets out of hand, and then we need to get you out of here." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Ethan and his ranch hands fought the fire, eventually containing it before it could spread to the ranch buildings or grazing lands. Hannah remained hidden in the house, packing what few belongings she had and preparing food for a journey. By nightfall, Ethan returned, exhausted and smoke-stained but grimly determined. "We leave at first light," he told Hannah. "Blackwell will be back, probably with more men. And this time he won't be asking questions." "Where will we go?" Hannah asked. "North," Ethan replied. "I have a friend with a ranch near the Oregon border. We'll head there first, then decide what to do next." "We," Hannah echoed, surprised. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "I can't stay here now. Blackwell knows I lied to him. He'll burn this place to the ground if he finds me here." The reality of what her presence had cost him struck Hannah with painful clarity. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I've ruined everything for you." "This ranch is just land and buildings," Ethan said quietly. "It can be rebuilt, but only if we're alive to do it." They set out before dawn, traveling with minimal supplies to maximize speed. Ethan had decided they would avoid main roads and towns, instead following game trails and creek beds through the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. It would take longer to reach their destination, but would be safer than risking encounters with Blackwell's men, who would surely be watching the established routes. The first few days of travel were tense and exhausting. They rode from first light until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and eat quick meals of jerky and hardtack. At night, they made cold camps away from trails, not daring to risk a fire that might be spotted. Despite the difficult conditions, Hannah found herself drawing strength from Ethan's steady presence. He was a skilled woodsman, always seeming to know which route would provide water, shelter, and safety. And though he remained reserved, the shared danger had created a bond between them that grew stronger with each passing day. On the 4th night, they camped in a small clearing beside a creek. The evening was unusually warm, and after their meager dinner, Hannah went to the creek to wash the dust of travel from her face and hands. As she knelt by the water, she heard Ethan approach and looked up to find him watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "You regret helping me?" she asked suddenly, the question that had been weighing on her mind finally finding voice. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Despite everything, I don't regret it." "You've lost your home because of me," Hannah said, rising to her feet. "I haven't lost it yet," Ethan corrected, "and even if I have, some things are worth the cost." The way he looked at her sent a flutter through Hannah's chest. Without thinking, she stepped closer to him. "Why did you really help me, Ethan? It wasn't just about your sister, was it?" Ethan's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "No," he admitted softly, "not entirely." Hannah wasn't sure who moved first, but suddenly his arms were around her and his lips were on hers. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Hannah responded, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his hands still at her waist. I shouldn't have done that, he murmured, though he made no move to release her. I'm glad you did, Hannah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Ethan smiled a genuine smile that transformed his face, softening the hard lines and bringing a light to his eyes that Hannah hadn't seen before. So am I, he admitted. That night, as they lay side by side beneath the stars, not touching but acutely aware of each other's presence, Hannah felt something she hadn't expected to find in her desperate flight from Sacramento. Hope. The next morning, there was a new ease between them, a shared glance here, a casual touch there as they broke camp and continued their journey. The terrain was becoming more rugged as they traveled north, the forests thicker and the game trails less distinct. By midday, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising a storm. Ethan studied the sky with concern. We need to find shelter, he said. That's going to hit hard and we don't want to be caught in the open. They pushed their tired horses harder, searching for any sign of a suitable place to wait out the coming storm. Finally, Ethan spotted what appeared to be an abandoned line shack nestled against a rocky hillside. The small, crude cabin was dusty and cobwebbed but had a solid roof and walls. Someone had even left a small stack of firewood beside the stone fireplace. This will do, Ethan said, unsaddling the horses and securing them in a lean-to attached to the side of the shack. That storm's coming in fast. He was right. Within an hour, rain was pounding on the roof, and lightning flashed across the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Inside, Hannah and Ethan had managed to get a small fire going in the fireplace, providing both warmth and light as darkness fell prematurely due to the storm. We'll have to stay here tonight, Ethan said, arranging their bedrolls near the fire. Trails will be too muddy and dangerous to navigate in the dark. Hannah wasn't sorry to have a roof over her head for the night. She sat close to the fire, watching the flames dance as Ethan rummaged through their supplies, producing a small flask. Whiskey, he explained, offering it to her. Just a little to ward off the chill. Hannah accepted the flask, taking a small sip and wincing at the burn. She handed it back, watching as Ethan took a longer swallow. Tell me about your life before all this, he said, settling beside her. Who is Hannah Rose when she's not being hunted by outlaws? The question caught Hannah by surprise. So much had happened that her previous life seemed like a distant memory. I was a schoolteacher, she said, smiling at his raised eyebrow. In a small town near Sacramento, nothing very exciting. A schoolteacher, Ethan repeated, studying her with new interest. Somehow I can picture that. What about you? Hannah asked. Have you always been a rancher? Ethan shook his head. I came west after the war. Bought the ranch with what little money I had saved and built it up from almost nothing. A shadow crossed his face. My sister was the only family I had left. After she was killed, the ranch became my whole life. Until now, Hannah said softly. Ethan's eyes met hers. Until now, he agreed, his voice equally soft. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of electricity crackled between them. When Ethan reached for her hand, Hannah didn't hesitate to twine her fingers with his. I know this isn't the right time, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. We're running for our lives, you hardly know me, but, Hannah prompted when he fell silent. But I find myself thinking about what happens after, when you're safe, when Blackwell is no longer a threat. Ethan's eyes held her steadily. I keep wondering if you'll disappear from my life as suddenly as you entered it. Hannah's heart beat faster at the vulnerability in his gaze. Is that what you think I want, to disappear? I don't know what you want, Ethan admitted. That's what I'm asking. Hannah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. When I first met you, all I wanted was to survive. Now, she squeezed his hand. Now I find myself wanting more than just survival. The kiss that followed was deeper than their first, filled with a hunger that had been building since they fled the ranch together. Hannah's arms wound around Ethan's neck as he pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair while the other pressed against the small of her back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "We should stop," he murmured, though his arms remained around her. Hannah knew he was right. Their situation was precarious, their futures uncertain. But in that moment, with the storm raging outside and the warmth of his embrace surrounding her, she didn't want to think about danger or uncertainty. "We don't know what tomorrow will bring," she whispered, "but tonight is ours." Ethan's eyes opened, searching hers for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he kissed her again, more gently this time. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips. Hannah's answer was to draw him closer, letting her actions speak what words could not adequately express. The storm continued through the night, but neither of them noticed, lost in a different kind of tempest, one that had been building since that first encounter by the creek, when a horse thief and a rancher had found common cause against a shared enemy. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Hannah awoke in Ethan's arms, their bedrolls pushed together before the now cold fireplace. For a moment she simply watched him sleep, his face relaxed and younger looking without the worry lines that usually creased his brow. As if sensing her gaze, Ethan's eyes opened, immediately finding hers. His slow smile warmed her more thoroughly than any fire could have. "Good morning," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good morning," Hannah replied, suddenly shy despite the intimacy they had shared. Ethan seemed to sense her uncertainty. He sat up, keeping the blanket around them both, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "No regrets," he said softly. "Not from me anyway." Hannah relaxed against him. "None from me either," she assured him. I don't know what happens now." "What happens now," Ethan said, rising and beginning to dress, "is that we keep moving. We're still 2 days from my friend's ranch, assuming the trails aren't too washed out from the storm." Hannah nodded, trying not to feel disappointed by his practical response. Of course their immediate concerns hadn't changed, they were still being hunted, still in danger. But as she gathered her own clothes, Ethan knelt beside her, taking her face gently between his hands. "And after that," he continued, his voice softening, "after you're safe, I want to see where this leads, if you do too." The simple declaration eased the knot of tension in Hannah's chest. "I do," she said, covering his hands with her own. They broke camp quickly, eager to make up for time lost to the storm. The trails were muddy but passable, and they made good progress throughout the morning. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that afforded a view of the terrain ahead, rolling hills covered in pine forest, with mountains visible in the far distance. "We'll follow that creek down into the valley," Ethan said, pointing to a silver ribbon visible between the trees. "From there, it's about a day's ride to my friend's ranch." Hannah nodded, relief washing through her at the thought of reaching their destination soon. The constant travel and vigilance were taking their toll. She was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. They were just starting down the ridge when Ethan suddenly reined his horse to a stop, his posture alert. Hannah halted beside him, instantly alarmed by his tension. "What is it?" she whispered. Ethan signaled for silence, his head tilted as he listened. Hannah strained her ears and heard what had caught his attention, the distant sound of horses moving through the forest below. "Could be anyone," she said hopefully. "Travelers, hunters." "Maybe," Ethan conceded, but his expression remained grim. "Let's not take chances, this way." He led them off the trail, guiding his horse carefully through the underbrush. Hannah followed, trying to move as silently as possible. They descended the ridge at an angle, staying within the cover of the pines while working their way toward the creek Ethan had indicated earlier. The sound of the other horses grew fainter, suggesting they were moving away from Hannah and Ethan's position. Just as Hannah began to relax, thinking they had avoided the unknown riders, a shout echoed through the trees. There, up on the ridge. Hannah's head snapped up to see a rider on the ridge they had just left, pointing in their direction. More riders appeared beside him. Hannah counted at least 4, possibly more. "Blackwell," Ethan growled, recognizing the lead figure even at a distance. "Ride." He shouted to Hannah, spurring his own horse forward. They plunged down the slope, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, Hannah heard the thunder of hooves as their pursuers gave chase. Her heart pounded in time with her horse's hoofbeats as they crashed through underbrush and leaped over fallen logs. Ethan led them toward the creek, evidently hoping the water would provide some cover or throw off their pursuers. As they burst from the trees onto the rocky bank, Hannah saw that the creek was swollen from the recent storm, its waters rushing fast and deep. "We can't cross here," she called to Ethan, eyeing the turbulent water with alarm. "We have to." He shouted back, already guiding his horse into the creek. "It's our only chance." Hannah hesitated for just a moment, then urged her mare forward into the icy water. The current immediately pulled at the animal's legs, but the horse was strong and determined. Hannah clung to the saddle, praying they would make it across safely. Halfway across, disaster struck. Ethan's horse stepped into a deeper section of the creek and lost its footing. Horse and rider went down, disappearing briefly beneath the rushing water. Hannah screamed Ethan's name, helplessly watching as he surfaced several yards downstream, struggling against the current. Without thinking, Hannah guided her horse toward him, leaning dangerously from the saddle to extend her arm. "Ethan, grab on." By some miracle, he managed to catch her hand. With a strength born of desperation, Hannah pulled him toward her until he could grasp the saddle. The added weight made the mare stumble, but the brave animal fought to keep its footing as Ethan hauled himself up behind Hannah. "My horse," he gasped, looking back to where his mount was being swept away by the current. "No time," Hannah said, pointing to the opposite bank where Blackwell's men had arrived. One raised a rifle, taking aim. A shot rang out, the bullet hitting the water just inches from them. Hannah kicked the mare's sides, urging her forward with desperate intensity. The horse lunged for the far bank, scrambling up the muddy slope as more shots whistled around them. Once clear of the water, Hannah bent low over the mare's neck, giving her free rein to run. Ethan clung to Hannah's waist, his body a solid weight behind her. They plunged into the forest on the far side of the creek, zigging and zagging between trees to make themselves harder targets. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as their sure-footed mare carried them deeper into the woods. Eventually, when Hannah judged they had put enough distance between themselves and their pursuers, she slowed the horse to a walk, mindful of not exhausting the animal that was now their only transportation. "Are you all right?" she asked Ethan, twisting to look at him over her shoulder. He nodded, though his face was pale and his clothes soaked. "Thanks to you," he said, his arms tightening briefly around her waist. "That was some quick thinking back there." "How did they find us?" Hannah asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since they'd spotted the riders. "I don't know for certain," Ethan admitted. "But my guess is they picked up our trail after the storm. Fresh tracks would be easy to follow in the mud." Hannah shivered, partly from the realization of how close they had come to being captured, partly from the chill of Ethan's wet clothes seeping through her own. "We need to find shelter," she said. "You'll catch your death in those wet clothes." Ethan made a sound that might have been a laugh. "If Blackwell doesn't kill me first." They traveled for another hour, moving as quickly as the tired horse could manage with its double burden. The terrain grew rockier, with outcroppings of granite breaking through the forest floor. Ethan directed Hannah toward one such formation, a jumble of massive boulders that formed a natural shelter on one side. "This will have to do," he said as they dismounted. "We can't risk going much farther without resting the horse." The space beneath the overhanging rock was dry and relatively protected from the wind. Hannah unsaddled the mare while Ethan gathered wood for a small fire. His movements were slower than usual, and Hannah noticed him wincing as he bent to arrange the kindling. "You're hurt," she said, moving to his side. "Just bruised," Ethan insisted, but when Hannah gently pressed her hand to his side, he couldn't suppress a grunt of pain. "Let me see," she demanded, her tone brooking no argument. Reluctantly, Ethan lifted his shirt to reveal a large, darkening bruise spreading across his ribs. Hannah gasped at the sight. "You might have broken ribs," she said, carefully probing the area. "What happened?" "Hit a rock when I went into the creek," Ethan admitted. "It's not too bad." "I've had worse." Hannah shook her head at his stoicism. "You need to rest, and we need to get you dry." She turned to their saddlebags, grateful they hadn't lost all their supplies when Ethan's horse was swept away. I have a spare shirt you can wear while yours dries." As night fell, they sat close to the small fire, sharing the last of their food. Ethan wore Hannah's spare shirt, which was too small for him but at least dry. His own clothes hung from a makeshift line near the fire. "We've lost a day at least," Ethan said, staring into the flames. "And we're down to one horse." "But we're alive," Hannah pointed out, "and Blackwell doesn't know where we're headed." Ethan nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "He's not going to give up, not after coming this close." "Why is he so determined?" Hannah asked. "Surely one witness isn't worth all this effort." "It's not just about you being a witness anymore," Ethan explained grimly. "Now it's about his reputation. If word gets out that a woman outsmarted him and got away, others might be emboldened to stand against him. He can't allow that." The weight of Ethan's words settled heavily on Hannah's shoulders. "So this won't end until he's caught or I'm dead." Ethan's hand found hers in the growing darkness. "Or until he's dead," he said quietly. The implication hung in the air between them. Hannah squeezed Ethan's hand, understanding what he wasn't saying. This might come down to a final confrontation, one that could cost either Ethan or Blackwell his life. They slept fitfully that night, taking turns keeping watch. By dawn, Ethan's clothes were dry, if a bit stiff, and they set out once more, both riding the tired mare. Their progress was necessarily slower, with only one horse bearing double weight, but Ethan assured Hannah they were not far from their destination. "Nathan Holbrook's ranch is just over that next range of hills," he told her as they paused to rest the horse around midday. "With luck, we'll reach it by nightfall. Will we be safe there?" Hannah asked. "Nathan's a good man with a large ranch and plenty of hands," Ethan said. "Blackwell would think twice before attacking such a well-defended place." The afternoon wore on, each mile bringing them closer to potential safety, but also draining their remaining energy. The mare was moving more slowly now, clearly feeling the strain of carrying two riders over rough terrain. As they crested a hill that Ethan said marked the boundary of the Holbrook Ranch, Hannah finally allowed herself to believe they might make it. Below them stretched a valley dotted with grazing cattle, and in the distance, the buildings of a substantial ranch. "We made it," she breathed, her arms tightening around Ethan's waist. She had insisted he ride in front, concerned about his injured ribs. "Not quite yet," Ethan cautioned, but she could hear the relief in his voice as well. They were halfway down the hill when the sound of a rifle shot shattered the peaceful scene. Their mare reared in panic, nearly unseating them both. Ethan fought to control the frightened animal as more shots rang out. "They found us," Hannah gasped, looking back to see riders emerging from the trees behind them. Ethan kicked the mare into a gallop, heading straight for the ranch buildings. "Just a little farther," he urged the exhausted horse. "Come on, girl." The mare responded valiantly, finding a last reserve of strength. Behind them, Blackwell and his men were gaining ground on their fresh mounts. More shots were fired, one coming close enough that Hannah felt the wind of its passage. "Ethan!" she cried, seeing a rider cutting across their path from the side, a shortcut that would intercept them before they reached the ranch. Ethan saw the danger too. He veered the mare sharply to the left, heading for a stand of trees that might provide some cover. The unexpected maneuver bought them precious seconds, but their pursuers quickly adjusted course. Just as it seemed they would be overtaken, a new sound joined the chaos, more gunshots, but coming from ahead of them. Hannah looked up to see a group of riders charging toward them from the direction of the ranch, rifles raised. "That's Nathan," Ethan shouted over his shoulder, recognition and relief in his voice. The Holbrook Ranch hands opened fire on Blackwell's men, forcing them to scatter and take cover. In the confusion, Ethan guided the mare the last few hundred yards to where Nathan Holbrook and his men waited. "Ethan Xavier," the rancher greeted, his rifle still trained on the distant figures of Blackwell's men. "Trouble seems to follow you like a shadow." "Nathan," Ethan acknowledged with a nod. "Sorry to bring it to your doorstep." Holbrook, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard, shrugged. "Been too peaceful around here lately anyway," he drawled. "Who's the lady?" Hannah rose. Ethan introduced her. She's the reason Jasper Blackwell is so determined to ventilate my hide. Nathan's eyebrows rose. The witness from Sacramento. At Ethan's nod, he let out a low whistle. You two have come a long way. And nearly didn't make it, Hannah said, finally finding her voice. Thank you for your help, Mr. Holbrook. Let's get you both to the house, Nathan said, signaling his men to form a protective circle around Ethan and Hannah. Blackwell won't try anything with all of us here, but he won't go far either. The main house of the Holbrook Ranch was a substantial two-story building, far larger and more impressive than Ethan's modest home. Nathan's wife, Sarah, a practical-looking woman with kind eyes, immediately took charge of getting the weary travelers settled. You poor dears, she clucked, ushering them into the kitchen where the warmth of the cooking stove was a welcome relief. You look half-starved and dead on your feet. While Sarah prepared a meal, Nathan had a hushed conversation with Ethan in the corner. Hannah was too tired to try to overhear, content for the moment to simply be safe and warm. When a plate of stew and fresh bread was set before her, she ate with an appetite born of days of inadequate food and constant fear. After the meal, Sarah showed Hannah to a guest room upstairs. You get some rest, she said firmly. The men will sort things out. Too exhausted to argue, Hannah sank onto the soft bed. Despite her intention to stay awake until Ethan came upstairs, she was asleep almost instantly. She awoke to darkness and the sound of voices from below. Disoriented at first, Hannah slowly remembered where she was and why. The clock on the bedside table showed it was past midnight. She had slept for hours. Rising, she wrapped a shawl Sarah had left for her around her shoulders and quietly made her way downstairs. The voices were coming from Nathan's study, Ethan's and Nathan's, deep in conversation. Can't just wait for him to attack, Ethan was saying as Hannah approached the partially open door. He'll gather more men first, make sure the odds are in his favor. My ranch hands are good fighters, Nathan replied, but they're not gunmen. If it comes to a prolonged siege, we'd be at a disadvantage. Hannah pushed the door open slightly, revealing herself. Both men looked up, surprise evident on their faces. Hannah, Ethan said, rising from his chair. You should be resting. I've slept enough, she said, entering the room. And this concerns me as much as anyone. What's happening? The men exchanged a glance before Nathan sighed and gestured for her to take a seat. Blackwell and his men are camped about 2 miles from here, he explained. They've made no move to attack yet, but they're not leaving either. We're discussing our options, Ethan added, his expression grave, none of them particularly good. Hannah looked between them. What are they, the options? We could try to slip away under cover of darkness, Ethan said. But they're likely watching all the trails out of here. Or we could wait them out, Nathan suggested. Hope they get tired of the standoff and move on, which won't happen, Ethan countered. Not with Blackwell. Or... Hannah prompted, sensing there was a third option neither man wanted to voice. Ethan met her gaze steadily. Or we end this once and for all, draw Blackwell out and deal with him directly. The implications were clear. You mean kill him, Hannah said flatly. It may come to that, Ethan admitted. One way or another, this has to end. The longer it goes on, the more people are put at risk. Hannah knew he was right. As long as Blackwell lived and remained free, she would never truly be safe, and neither would anyone who helped her. There's another option, she said suddenly, an idea forming in her mind. One that might avoid bloodshed. Both men looked at her skeptically. I'm listening, Nathan said after a moment. We use me as bait, Hannah explained, but not in the way Blackwell would expect. We don't try to run or hide. Instead, we send word to the territorial marshal that Jasper Blackwell and his entire gang are here practically offering themselves up for arrest. Ethan shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. You're not putting yourself at risk. I'm already at risk, Hannah pointed out. We all are, but this way we control the situation. The nearest marshal's office is in Stockton, correct? At Nathan's nod, she continued, That's what a day's hard ride from here. About that, Nathan confirmed. I could send one of my men tonight. If the marshal believes the message, he might bring a posse by tomorrow evening. And in the meantime, Ethan demanded, we just sit here and hope Blackwell doesn't attack before help arrives. No, Hannah said firmly. In the meantime, we make Blackwell believe I'm willing to surrender myself to save everyone else. We arrange a meeting somewhere open, where your men can keep watch, Mr. Holbrook, and we stall until the marshal arrives." The men were silent, considering her plan. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice tight with emotion. "It's too dangerous. If anything goes wrong, if the marshal doesn't come in time." Hannah moved to his side, taking his hand. "Then we're no worse off than we are now," she said softly. "But if it works, this ends without more bloodshed." Nathan cleared his throat. "It's not a bad plan," he admitted reluctantly. "Risky, but it could work." Ethan looked between them, clearly outnumbered. "I don't like it," he said flatly, "but I don't see that we have much choice." The decision made, they spent the next hour working out the details. Nathan would send his most reliable hand to Stockton immediately with an urgent message for the marshal. At noon the next day, Hannah would send word to Blackwell that she wished to negotiate, offering to surrender herself in exchange for guarantees of safety for Ethan and the Holbrooks. The meeting would take place at dusk in an open meadow about a mile from the ranch house, close enough that Nathan's men could provide cover if needed, but far enough that Blackwell wouldn't feel he was being led into a trap. "The timing is crucial," Nathan emphasized. "We need to keep Blackwell talking until the marshal arrives." "Leave that to me," Hannah said with more confidence than she felt. "I can be very persuasive when I need to be." As dawn broke, word came that Nathan's messenger had slipped past Blackwell's men and was on his way to Stockton. Now all they could do was wait and hope the marshal would respond to their urgent summons. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Hannah tried to rest, knowing she would need all her wits about her for the confrontation ahead, but sleep eluded her. Instead, she found herself drawn to Ethan, who was equally restless. They walked together in Nathan's garden, screened from view of the surrounding countryside by high adobe walls. The domesticated setting seemed at odds with the danger that lurked beyond. "I'm still not convinced this is the right course," Ethan said, breaking a lengthy silence. "If Blackwell suspects a trap, he'll shoot first and ask questions later." "He won't," Hannah insisted. "His ego won't allow him to. He wants me to see him win, to know I've lost." "Men like him need that validation." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. "How did you become so wise about men's darker natures?" he asked, studying her face. "You're a schoolteacher from Sacramento, yet you speak as if you've looked into the souls of men like Blackwell before." Hannah's gaze dropped. "My father was a judge," she said quietly. "A good man, but one who made powerful enemies. I grew up watching him deal with threats and intimidation. I learned how men like Blackwell think." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. "That's why you testified," he realized. "Not just because it was right, but because you've seen what happens when good people remain silent." Hannah nodded, touched by his perception. "My father always said that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Your father raised a remarkable daughter," he said softly, "but I wish you weren't quite so brave right now." Hannah smiled despite the gravity of their situation. "If I weren't so brave, I'd never have stolen your horse," she pointed out, "and we wouldn't be here now." "Here, about to face down a notorious outlaw?" Ethan asked wryly. "Here, together," Hannah corrected, her voice softening. The look that passed between them needed no words. Ethan drew her into his arms, holding her close as if trying to protect her from what was to come. Hannah returned his embrace, drawing strength from his solid presence. "When this is over," Ethan murmured against her hair, "when Blackwell is in custody or dead and you're truly safe, will you come back to the ranch with me, help me rebuild what was lost?" Hannah pulled back slightly to look up at him, her heart full. "Are you asking me to stay with you, Ethan Xavier?" "I'm asking for more than that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm asking you to build a life with me, to be my wife if you'll have me." The proposal, coming at this most unlikely of moments, left Hannah speechless. They had known each other such a short time, yet she felt as if she had found a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. "Yes," she whispered finally, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, I'll build a life with you. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The kiss they shared was filled with promise and the sweet ache of possibility, a moment of perfect connection before the storm that awaited them. As the afternoon waned, preparations intensified. Nathan's men positioned themselves strategically around the meadow where the meeting would take place, hidden but ready to provide covering fire if needed. Hannah changed into a clean dress borrowed from Sarah Holbrook, wanting to appear composed and dignified for what might be the most important performance of her life. Ethan, meanwhile, refused to be sidelined. Despite Hannah's protests, he insisted on accompanying her to the meeting. "Blackwell wants me almost as much as he wants you," he pointed out. "If I'm not there, he'll be suspicious." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Hannah stood on the porch of the Holbrook ranch house, watching a rider depart with her message for Blackwell. The simple note stated her willingness to surrender herself if Blackwell would guarantee that no harm would come to the Holbrooks or Ethan. "Do you think he'll agree?" she asked Nathan, who stood beside her. The rancher's weathered face was grim. "He'll agree," he said. "Whether he'll keep his word is another matter entirely." An hour later, the messenger returned with Blackwell's response. He would meet Hannah at the designated location at dusk. He agreed to her terms with the condition that she and Ethan come alone, unarmed. "It's a trap," Ethan said flatly when he read the message. "He has no intention of letting any of us walk away." "Of course it's a trap," Hannah agreed calmly, "but he doesn't know that we know that, and he doesn't know about the marshal." "If the marshal comes in time," Ethan reminded her. "That's a mighty big if to stake our lives on." Despite his misgivings, there was no turning back now. As dusk approached, Hannah and Ethan prepared to leave for the meeting place. Nathan provided them with a wagon rather than horses, reasoning that it would be harder for Blackwell to justify shooting them if they were clearly unarmed and making no attempt at a quick getaway. "My men will be in position," Nathan assured them as they climbed onto the wagon seat. "If things go south before the marshal arrives, they'll provide covering fire so you can get to safety." Hannah nodded, her throat too tight for words. The reality of what they were about to do was finally hitting her. Beside her, Ethan took up the reins, his face set in grim determination. "Ready?" he asked quietly. Hannah took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Ready," she confirmed. The meadow was bathed in the golden light of sunset when they arrived. Hannah could see figures waiting at the far end, Blackwell and several of his men, mounted on horses. Despite the distance, she could feel Blackwell's malevolent gaze fixed on her. Ethan halted the wagon about 50 yards from the outlaws. For a long moment, neither party moved, each assessing the other across the expanse of waving grass. Finally, Blackwell nudged his horse forward, advancing slowly until he was about 20 yards from the wagon. Two of his men flanked him, their hands hovering near their holstered guns. "Miss Rose," Blackwell called, his voice carrying easily in the still evening air. "How good of you to finally stop running." Hannah steeled herself and stood up in the wagon, facing him directly. "Mr. Blackwell," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady, "I'm here as agreed." Blackwell's thin lips curved in what might have been called a smile if it had contained any warmth. "So I see, and Mr. Xavier as well, how convenient. We've kept our part of the bargain," Ethan said, his voice hard. "We're here unarmed as you demanded." Blackwell's cold eyes shifted to him. "So eager to die for a woman, Xavier. I must say I didn't take you for the romantic type." "No one needs to die today," Hannah interjected, drawing Blackwell's attention back to her. "I'm willing to come with you peacefully, but I want your word that Ethan and the Holbrooks will be left alone." Blackwell studied her for a long moment. "You're in no position to negotiate, Miss Rose." "But I'm feeling generous today," he gestured expansively. "Come here and I give you my word that Xavier can ride away. As for the Holbrooks, they were never my quarry to begin with." Hannah glanced at the sun, which was now touching the western horizon. They needed to stall longer. "I need more than your word," she said. "After all, you swore in court that you were nowhere near Angel's camp the day of the robbery." A flash of anger crossed Blackwell's face. "You've got spirit, I'll grant you that. It's almost a shame to kill you." "If you kill me," Hannah countered. "You'll confirm your guilt to everyone. Is that really what you want, to spend the rest of your life as a hunted man?" Blackwell laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. "I'm already a hunted man, Miss Rose. One more murder won't make much difference." "It might," Hannah insisted. "Right now, it's your word against mine. Kill me and you remove all doubt. But if you let me live, if you let me publicly retract my testimony." She let the implication hang in the air. Blackwell's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. "You do that. Recant your testimony to save Ethan's life." "Yes." Hannah put all the conviction she could muster into her voice, praying Blackwell would believe the lie. Beside her, Ethan tensed but said nothing, understanding her strategy. Blackwell seemed to be weighing her offer exactly as Hannah had hoped. Every minute they kept him talking was another minute closer to the marshal's potential arrival. "An interesting proposition," Blackwell said finally, "but why should I trust you?" "For the same reason I'm here," Hannah replied, "because it's the only way this ends without more bloodshed." The standoff continued, with Hannah and Blackwell engaged in a verbal chess match while the sun slipped lower in the sky. Ethan remained silent beside her, but she could feel his growing tension as darkness began to fall. Where was the marshal? Had their message failed to reach him, or had he simply decided the risk wasn't worth taking? Just as Hannah was running out of delaying tactics, the sound of multiple horses approaching from the east caught everyone's attention. Blackwell's head snapped around, his expression darkening as he realized he'd been tricked. "You lying bitch," he snarled, drawing his gun. "This was a setup all along." Hannah's heart lurched as she saw the gun aimed directly at her. Time seemed to slow as Blackwell's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Ethan lunged across the wagon seat, shoving Hannah down and covering her body with his own. The shot rang out and Ethan grunted in pain. Chaos erupted. Nathan's hidden men opened fire, forcing Blackwell and his companions to scatter for cover. More riders appeared, a group of men led by a stern-faced individual wearing a marshal's badge. "U.S. Marshal," a commanding voice shouted. "Drop your weapons." Hannah barely registered the arrival of the law. Her attention was focused entirely on Ethan, who lay heavily against her, his breathing ragged. "Ethan," she gasped, struggling to shift his weight enough to see his face. "Ethan, are you hit?" He groaned, rolling slightly to one side. "Just grazed," he managed, though the spreading stain on his shirt suggested otherwise. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Hannah assured him, tears springing to her eyes. "You saved me again." Around them, the gunfire intensified as Blackwell and his men fought back against the marshal's posse. Nathan's ranch hands joined the fray, the combined force quickly overwhelming the outlaws. Hannah paid little attention to the battle, her focus entirely on Ethan. She tore a strip from her petticoat, pressing it against the wound in his shoulder to stem the bleeding. "Don't you dare die on me," she whispered fiercely. "Not when we have a life to build together." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Wouldn't dream of it," he murmured, "too stubborn to die." "Before I make you, Mrs. Xavier." The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Hannah looked up to see the marshal approaching the wagon, his gun still drawn but pointed at the ground. "Madam," he acknowledged with a nod. "I'm Marshal James Harker. Got your message just in time, it seems." "Blackwell?" Hannah asked, still pressing the makeshift bandage to Ethan's wound. "In custody," the marshal confirmed. "Along with what's left of his gang. 2 of his men are dead, the rest surrendered." Relief washed over Hannah, so profound it left her light-headed. "Ethan's been shot," she said, gesturing to the man half-cradled in her arms. "He needs a doctor." Marshal Harker leaned over to examine Ethan. "Shoulder wound," he assessed. "Painful but not likely fatal. We'll get him back to the ranch and send for a doctor." Within the hour, Ethan was settled in a bed at the Holbrook Ranch, his wound cleaned and bandaged by Sarah until the doctor could arrive from the nearest town. The bullet had passed through his shoulder without hitting bone, painful, but as the marshal had predicted, not life-threatening. Hannah sat by his bedside, refusing to leave even when Sarah gently suggested she get some rest. Outside, she could hear the commotion as the marshal and his deputies secured their prisoners for the journey to Stockton, where Blackwell would finally face justice for his crimes. You should sleep, Ethan murmured, his eyes opening to find her watching him. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I, Hannah replied softly, taking his hand in hers. I nearly lost you today. I'm not letting you out of my sight. Ethan's lips curved in a faint smile. Stubborn woman, he murmured, but the affection in his voice belied the words. You proposed to a stubborn woman, Hannah reminded him. Too late to change your mind now. I wouldn't dream of it, Ethan assured her, squeezing her hand weakly. I knew what I was getting into the moment you stole my horse. Hannah laughed, the sound tinged with the relief of finally being free from the shadow of fear that had hung over her for so long. That's quite the foundation for a marriage horse theft and gunfights. Makes for a good story to tell our grandchildren someday, Ethan replied, his eyes already beginning to close as exhaustion overtook him. Hannah leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to his forehead. Rest now, she whispered. We have all the time in the world for stories. As Ethan drifted into sleep, Hannah remained by his side, watching the rise and fall of his chest and marveling at the strange path that had led her here. From that terrifying moment in the Sacramento courtroom to this quiet room in a ranch house far from home, every step, even the desperate ones, had brought her closer to a future she had never imagined for herself. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Jasper Blackwell would stand trial for his crimes, and Hannah would testify again, this time without fear. And then she and Ethan would return to the Rocking X Ranch to rebuild what had been lost and create something new together. It wasn't the life she had envisioned when she'd stood before that judge in Sacramento. It was something far better, a life chosen freely, with a man who had risked everything to protect her, in a place that already felt more like home than anywhere she had been before. Hannah rose soon to be Hannah. Xavier looked down at her hand clasped in Ethan's and smiled. Sometimes, she reflected, the most dangerous journeys led to the most unexpected destinations. And sometimes, those destinations were exactly where you were meant to be all along. 2 months later, Hannah stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt ranch house at the Rocking X, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of the property. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding forest. So much had changed since that fateful day when Jasper Blackwell had finally been brought to justice. Hannah had traveled to Stockton to testify at his trial, her head held high as she recounted the events of the stagecoach robbery. This time, there had been no fear in her voice, no doubt in her mind. With Marshal Harker's testimony corroborating her account, the outcome had been swift and definitive. Blackwell and his surviving men were sentenced to hang. Hannah had not attended the execution. As Ethan had pointed out, some ghosts were best laid to rest from a distance. Instead, they had focused on rebuilding both the ranch house, which had indeed been burned by Blackwell's men during their absence, and their lives together. The sound of hoofbeats drew Hannah's attention. Ethan was returning from checking the northern pasture, his figure straight and tall in the saddle, despite the lingering stiffness in his left shoulder from the bullet wound. The sight of him still caused her heart to quicken, even after these months together. He dismounted with his characteristic fluid grace, leading his horse to the hitching post before joining her on the porch. His face, tanned by the sun and wind, broke into a smile as he approached. Admiring the view, he asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. Always, Hannah replied, returning his smile. How's the new fencing coming along? Nearly finished, Ethan said, satisfaction evident in his voice. Just in time for winter. He studied her face for a moment. You look thoughtful, penny for your thoughts. Hannah leaned against him slightly, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I was just thinking about how different my life is now from what I had planned. Ethan's arm slipped around her waist. Regrets? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Hannah shook her head emphatically. Not one, she assured him. I was a school teacher in Sacramento, living a quiet, predictable life. Now I'm a rancher's wife in Knight's Ferry, helping to rebuild a home and learning something new every day. And dodging fewer bullets, Ethan added wryly. Hannah laughed, the sound clear and bright in the evening air. There is that, she agreed, Though I must say, married life with you is hardly lacking in excitement. It was true. Their wedding had been a simple affair, held in the Holbrook's garden with Nathan serving as Ethan's best man and Sarah standing up for Hannah. Marshall Harker had even made the journey from Stockton to attend, bringing news of Blackwell's sentencing as a wedding gift of sorts. The honeymoon had been equally simple 2 weeks at the ranch, just the two of them, getting to know each other in all the ways that had been impossible during their flight from danger. Hannah had discovered that Ethan, for all his outward stoicism, possessed a gentle tenderness that surfaced when they were alone together. And Ethan had learned that his schoolteacher bride was as passionate and adventurous in private as she was brave in the face of danger. Returning to the Rocking X had been bittersweet. The main house had been reduced to charred timbers, and many of the outbuildings damaged or destroyed. But Ethan's foreman and the few hands who had remained had already begun the work of rebuilding. With Hannah by his side, Ethan had thrown himself into the task with renewed vigor. Now, 2 months later, the ranch house stood restored, larger and more comfortable than before, with a spacious kitchen where Hannah could indulge her newfound love of cooking, and a small library filled with books they had ordered from San Francisco. The barn had been rebuilt as well, and the corrals expanded to accommodate the new horses Ethan had purchased to replace those lost or stolen during their absence. "I had a letter from my friend Alina in Sacramento today," Hannah mentioned as they turned to go inside. "She says my former students still ask about me. Apparently, I've become something of a legend, the schoolteacher who helped bring down the notorious Jasper Blackwell." Ethan chuckled as he held the door for her. "I'm married to a legend," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Should I be intimidated, terrified?" Hannah confirmed with a grin. "Especially since this legend has decided what's for dinner, and you're expected to compliment it enthusiastically regardless of how it turns out." "A fate worse than death," Ethan agreed solemnly, though his eyes danced with amusement. "Whatever will I do? Suffer in silence like a proper husband," Hannah suggested, moving to the stove where a pot of stew simmered. "And perhaps remind yourself of all the reasons you married me despite my dubious culinary skills." Ethan caught her around the waist, pulling her back against his chest. "I can think of at least a dozen reasons without even trying," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. "Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness, the fact that you saved my life, the way you look in the morning light." Hannah turned in his arms, her expression softening. "And here I thought it was because I stole your horse," she teased, though her voice had grown husky. "That too," Ethan agreed, bending to capture her lips in a kiss that quickly deepened, dinner momentarily forgotten. Later, as they sat at the kitchen table enjoying the stew, which had turned out quite well despite Hannah's self-deprecating comments, Ethan broached a subject they had discussed only in the abstract until now. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch," he said, breaking off a piece of bread. "The Dawson property to the east is for sale. It's good grazing land with reliable water sources." Hannah nodded, sensing there was more to this than simple business expansion. "It would certainly give us room to increase the herd," she agreed. "And room for other things," Ethan added, his gaze meeting hers meaningfully. "A bigger family, perhaps." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. They had spoken of children, of course, but always as a someday possibility. The look in Ethan's eyes now suggested that someday might be closer than she had thought. "Are you saying what I think you're saying, Mr. Xavier?" she asked, setting down her spoon. Ethan's expression was a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I'm saying that I love you, Hannah Xavier, and I can think of nothing I want more than to raise a family with you on this land." He reached across the table to take her hand. "But only if you're ready. I know this isn't the life you planned." Hannah's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Oh, Ethan," she said softly, "this life with you is better than anything I could have planned, and yes, I want a family with you, very much." The joy that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the hills, gradual at first, then blazing with warmth and light. "You're sure?" he asked, squeezing her hand. "Life out here isn't easy, especially with little ones." I'm sure, Hannah confirmed, her own happiness bubbling up inside her. Besides, any child of ours is bound to be as stubborn and resourceful as its parents. I pity the outlaw who tries to cross a Xavier. Ethan laughed, rising from his chair to pull her into an embrace. God help us if we have a daughter with your spirit, he murmured against her hair. I'll be fighting off suitors with a shotgun, or a son with your protective instincts, Hannah countered, melting into his arms. No one would dare come near his sister. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms in the warm kitchen of their rebuilt home, dreaming of the future they would create together. When spring came to Knight's Ferry, it brought with it a renewal that seemed to echo the rebirth Hannah and Ethan had experienced in their own lives. The ranch was flourishing, the expanded herd thriving on the newly acquired Dawson property. The orchard Hannah had insisted on planting near the house was showing its first green buds, promising future harvests of apples and pears. And Hannah herself was blossoming with new life, her condition now unmistakable as she moved about the ranch, overseeing the household and helping with the lighter ranch work that Ethan still allowed her to do, despite his protective concerns. On a particularly fine April morning, Hannah sat on the porch, a letter in her hands and a smile playing about her lips. The letter was from Sarah Holbrook, containing news that Nathan had been elected sheriff of their county, a position he had never sought, but had accepted at the urging of the townspeople who respected his fair-mindedness and courage. Good news. Ethan asked, coming up the steps from the corral where he had been working with a new colt. Hannah held up the letter. Nathan Holbrook is now Sheriff Holbrook, she reported. Sarah says he's already complaining about the paperwork. Ethan chuckled, settling into the chair beside hers. Nathan never was one for sitting behind a desk, but he'll make a good sheriff. He's a man who knows right from wrong and isn't afraid to stand by his principles. Rather like someone else I know, Hannah observed, her hand automatically moving to rest on the curve of her belly where their child grew. Ethan's gaze followed the movement, his expression softening as it always did when he was reminded of the life they had created together. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, reaching over to cover her hand with his own. "Wonderful," Hannah assured him. "Your son or daughter has been quite active this morning. I think we have a future ranch hand on our hands." "Or a future schoolteacher," Ethan suggested, a teasing light in his eyes. "With a penchant for stealing horses and outsmarting outlaws." Hannah laughed, the sound mingling with the birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle, the soundtrack of their shared life. "Heaven help us if that's the case," she said, "though I suppose there are worse legacies to pass on than courage and resourcefulness." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "I can think of no better mother for my children," he said, his voice growing serious. "You'll teach them everything that matters, how to stand up for what's right, how to face fear with dignity, how to love without reservation." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, her emotions closer to the surface these days. "And you'll teach them to be strong, to protect what they love, to rebuild when life tries to tear them down," she replied softly. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a rider coming up the lane, Ethan's foreman, Jake, returning from town with supplies and the mail. He dismounted at the hitching post, touching his hat respectfully to Hannah before addressing Ethan. "Got something interesting in town, boss," he reported. "Newspaper from Sacramento, thought you and Mrs. Xavier might want to see it." He handed over a folded newspaper, already opened to an interior page. The headline caught Hannah's eye immediately. "Blackwell Gang Associate Confesses to Additional Crimes." Ethan scanned the article quickly, his expression growing increasingly grim. "One of Blackwell's men, facing his own hanging, has confessed to a series of robberies and murders dating back 5 years, he summarized for Hannah. "Including the stagecoach robbery that killed my sister." Hannah's hand tightened around his. "Oh, Ethan," she breathed. Is it some form of closure, do you think?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, still staring at the newspaper. "I don't know if there's ever truly closure for something like that," he said finally, "but it's something. Confirmation that justice was served even if it came too late for Emily." Hannah leaned against him, offering silent support. She knew that the wound of his sister's death would never fully heal, but perhaps this news would help in some small way. Ethan folded the newspaper and set it aside, his gaze returning to Hannah and the new life growing within her. "Emily would have loved you," he said suddenly. "And she would have been so excited about becoming an aunt." "Tell me about her," Hannah encouraged, recognizing his need to remember his sister as she had been in life, not just as a victim of violence. Ethan's smile was tinged with sadness but genuine. "She was a force of nature," he began. "Stubborn as the day is long, with a laugh that could light up a room. She taught school for a while like you, before deciding she wanted to see more of the world." As Ethan spoke, painting a picture of the sister he had lost, Hannah listened with her heart full of love for this man who had endured so much loss yet remained capable of such deep affection. She thought of the child they would soon welcome, and how that child would grow up hearing stories of the aunt. They would never meet stories that would keep Emily's memory alive for a new generation. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they sat together on the porch of their home, surrounded by the life they had built from the ashes of tragedy. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada mountains stood eternal against the horizon, a reminder of both the challenges they had overcome and the enduring nature of the love they had found amidst danger and desperation. Hannah Rose Xavier, once a schoolteacher who had risked everything to testify against a dangerous outlaw, now found herself exactly where she was meant to be, beside the man who had hidden her from those who wished her harm, only to discover that in saving her, he had also saved himself. And as the child within her stirred again, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that the journey that had begun with a stolen horse and a desperate flight had led her not just to safety, but to home.